down across the country. Craig Young, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you, Paul.
Now, how are you doing there? You're across town in Auckland, like me.
Yeah, I'm up the Hibiscus Coast in Silverdale, and well, at least today the weather's a bit better, but not that I've been outside very much. I think lockdown this time we just sort of kept working, so haven't had much chance to just take a break yet.
Yeah, it tends to things kind of tend to happen pretty quickly, and certainly with this one, there wasn't a whole lot of chance to think about it or to prepare. Well, today there's a whole bunch that I'm sort of keen to delve into. We've got some stats through from Chorus around what's actually happening on our networks. We want to delve into news from the land of our telecommunications providers there. Commerce Commission, Spark. The topic of working from home comes up again, and there's been ongoing research on that area and what we should expect, what's working, and so on. And then there's a few other bits of news as well, and even been playing around with a bit of new. Bit of new technology, a folding phone from Samsung, the Galaxy Z Flip 3 and the Z Fold 3 have been announced into the market, and so I've been having a little bit of a look there while we wait for them to be released publicly. But yeah, let's jump straight in, Craig, with just a quick intro on yourself, because we want everyone to know who they're hearing from today.
Yeah, cool. Tanakwe, I'm Craig Young. I'm the CEO of TUANZ, the Technology Users Association, and we can delve into that a little bit more. We've been around 35 years. Many people have been perhaps in the telecommunications area would know of us. And we often pop up in the media sometimes. But I've been doing this job for nearly 7 years now, and I love it. It's a great job. I get to talk to people like yourself about things that I know very little about. Well, that's not quite right. I am quite a generalist and have got along. As you can see, I'm getting a bit older and maybe not wiser, but I have been in the IT and telco industry all for longer than I want to think, but it's somewhere over 20 years. I trained as an accountant, but I'm going to annoy all the accountants and say it's very boring being an accountant and much more interesting being in technology.
Well, what I love about technology, Craig, is it just keeps moving and it moves fast, and it's certainly never boring. And I once a long time ago, partway through my schooling, thought I wanted to be an accountant too, but I somewhere along the way lost that interest and discovered technology. So first up, I wanted to delve into to what we've heard from Chorus. They've sent through a bit of information. We're Thursday now. They were saying that it was Wednesday evening traffic on their network saw a record peak through 3.6 terabits per second. They said it was, or was that Tuesday nights actually? Possibly it was. Yep. And an uplift of 27% on Monday night's traffic. So this is the reality of lockdown. The whole world, the whole country at least, have got really no choice other than to be in their homes. And what do you do when you're at home? Well, a lot of us go online. That seems to be the message there.
Yeah. And then we saw this last year, when we first went into lockdown last year, and we looked at it and we saw these big numbers come through. And, I think Kiwis should be incredibly thankful and proud of the fact that, there was some very good decisions made back in the 2000s about investing in our broadband infrastructure, so like our mobile networks, but also our fixed networks, and the number of people of us, that have taken up fibre in our houses. I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago you'd have a gig? I mean, I've got a gig into my house, and I wouldn't go back now. I wouldn't go back to anything less, only because I know that it's there and it's reliable and it works. And we couldn't have done any of this working at home if we hadn't had decent broadband. Now, we should just say that's great if you live in places like we do, in urban Auckland, and any urban centre around the country. But there are parts of our country where connectivity is not that great, or that for socioeconomic reasons, people don't have connectivity. So we shouldn't. So on the one hand, I want to say we should be pleased and proud. On the other, I think we've still got quite a bit of work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. There'll always be more that can be done. I've been speaking about this. I guess a number of years that I've been talking about this futurist mindset and futurist thinking, and certainly speaking at Ingram Micro's their showcase event in Auckland, Hamilton, and in Tauranga recently, and that was certainly one of the things that I call out, that we have to be very thankful of here in New Zealand, is that futurist thinking that was applied, looking back a decade or so back to when that decision was made to really invest in our broadband infrastructure. And of course, we love to compare ourselves to the Australians, and can certainly say we're punching well above our weight on this one compared to where they've come out. So something to appreciate. The recent stats that came through from on the ultra-fast broadband initiative says that 85%, I think, of population now has that fibre running past their homes, and we see a higher and higher uptake of actually connecting up to it. So very helpful. And of course, we've got the 4G, 5G, and even some pretty good satellites starting to serve New Zealand as well, haven't we, Craig?
We do, and I think we've been in contact with Starlink, and certainly they want to give us a bit of an update of where they're up to. But they're not the only satellite providers that are upping their game. There's a number of them coming into New Zealand, and there's a number of every week there's something different happening. But these Starlink is an example of what's called low Earth orbit, so they're not as high in the sky. And they don't stay still. That's the other interesting thing. If you look at if you think about a satellite installation on a house or anywhere, you think of a dish, your sky dish points in a certain direction and it stays still, it doesn't move. But these low Earth orbit ones, the Starlink ones, they're constant. You don't see it necessarily, but they're constantly moving as the satellites come across the sky. So it's a fascinating piece of technology, and we'll see more of it as it comes through this year. They certainly have a really, important part to play in providing coverage where people can't get other forms. All these sorts of things coming through.
I think that the low Earth orbit satellites really open things up. I think pretty large chunk of the South Island now is covered, and they're expecting to be covering the whole country. I think in the months ahead, sort of by early into 2022. Not necessarily as reliable as a fixed connection. There's a few variances, but what a cool step forward I think the world has made from a connectivity perspective. To have that becoming available. And it all just increases the competition and the options available, and it makes it easier. There's also been the Morai program that has been put in place to get broadband out there as well. I'm not quite sure how that plays out in lockdown. I guess that will vary from location to location. A couple of other stats that came through, they were saying, Chorus was saying, more than 26 petabytes of data transported across their network on Wednesday. So that was a new record, and I think you were pointing out to me the reference that they used. That was the equivalent of 1,000 years of a single Netflix HD video stream. So yeah, a lot of content, really, going across the networks. And yeah, this is the sort of thing where that future investment was made, similar to when we talk about 5G, I think, where we don't necessarily know just yet exactly how the extra bandwidth that becomes available over time will get utilized. But I think we've learned that probably for quite a few years to come, we're going to find good uses of any extra bandwidth that becomes available to us.
I always remember, Mark, my first year at university, which is a long time ago, in the 1980s, a marketing lecturer talked about, it's not enough to build the best mousetrap or a better mousetrap. You've got to solve a problem. Technology sort of seems to turn that on its head, doesn't it? It's like you get, who knew, for example, when the iPhone came out, you needed that sort of device in your hand, and now everybody has a smartphone, so technology sort of, you're right. We know that if you provide the tools and the infrastructure, smart people, wherever they are, including New Zealand, will come along and find ways to use those smart resources to improve not just the business or economy in New Zealand, but in people's lives as well. You talked about the Marae program, just the benefit that will come through by having those particularly rural marae connected, and the uplift that will provide, not just to education, all those sorts of things, but to sharing of their tikanga, having their dispersed whānau being able to connect back to their marae. There's all these sorts of really clever things that get done. I mean, the other thing is, Paul, we're doing this live on a video stream. Who would have thought 10 years ago? I can remember video conferencing being clunky, being hard, being awful, and having to have particular devices. And now with the improvements in consumer technology and with connectivity, we can do things like this. We can stay in touch. I have a son. I have two sons. One is in Northern Ireland in Belfast. We last saw him on the 1st of February 2020, and before we flew back. We haven't been able to get over there. He hasn't been able to come here, but we've been able to keep in contact because of these tools. So you're right. We will find ways to use these things.
Definitely. And look, I guess what I like to encourage is that we should be, as Kiwis, continuing to look out for what are the opportunities, where's the world going with the new technologies, and how can we leverage these things? Because if we get it right, then it can really play into a great future for New Zealand, and the issues and so on that we have as a country, whether it's poverty and housing and equality challenges. If we utilize technology well, we put ourselves in a much better position to actually solve those challenges. Anyway,
Absolutely.
Enough of a rant from me. On to New Zealand COVID Tracer. One thing here that I really appreciate is that we've been seeing from the Ministry of Health, real transparency around the COVID Tracer app. When it first came out, I've got to say, I wasn't, there were a bunch of things I wasn't super impressed with. But what I really love is that they've followed a good approach, which is that continuous improvement, and just kept building out the app. We've got the stats in from that anyone can go and download. There's a CSV there, file there, with the kind of the key high level data, I suppose, that's updated on a daily basis. We saw on was it Tuesday? We're up to 1.58 million active devices with the Bluetooth element there, working away in the background. And, that's obviously a part of the contact tracing mechanism. It's quite different to the check-ins. The check-in side, I think, has been overall has been pretty disappointing in terms of my following of it for for quite some time. We did sort of hit a peak there on Tuesday, where there were 758,000 scans. But our typical sort of day over the past month was in the sometimes as low as 440,000, and up to about 650,000 scans a day. So with those sort of numbers, you know that the bulk of us haven't actually been super disciplined about scanning in. And I would count myself amongst those that didn't scan every single time. I'm probably not as religious about that as I could have been, and that's probably unhelpful. So we have talked about it a little bit, but we probably needed a few more reminders on that front.
I thought the really interesting one was the Bluetooth numbers haven't shifted that much, which I think means that they've been pretty active, that people have turned it on. And I was listening to an interview this morning with the owner of the Laurenton Group, who are the owners of Bar 101, talking about how many, it's one of those places of interest. And he did make the comment, that most of the people that would have been in the bar on Friday night, because the student bar, were Gen Z, and they typically are tech savvy, so they would have had their Bluetooth turned on. So, that is one of those positive steps. I thought the other fascinating thing was the number of manual entries in the system on Tuesday. So that went from, I think, something like 25,000 on Monday to 250,000 manual entries on Tuesday, while everybody rushed to fill in the gaps that they hadn't scanned on. So, that's another good thing as well, that people thought, oh, right, I do actually need to go back and get that information in there, because that's one of the big tools in fighting this particular variant of COVID, is having those entries in there. I'm with you. I'm not very good at scanning. I do it when I remember. And we did have a speaker at last week's Tech Users Day. We had a big conference last Tuesday of last week. And Dr. Lloyd McCann, who's from Mercy Radiology, he's the clinical director or head of medicine and also their CEO, very smart man, looking at the future of technology in medicine. Has some amazing stuff that he's talking about, but he was pretty adamant, reminding people to scan, and use the app.
Yeah, yep. I agree. But I looked at my stats and it had sort of dropped off compared to the number of scans that I was doing a few months ago. So the gamification element of it, I think, is quite good, where it tells you how many days out of the last I think it's out of the last 14 that you've scanned. I like that. I think that's smart. And just one of the examples of where they've just improved that app over time. But now we're in lockdown. There's
I wonder, talking about gamification, maybe we should ask the Pokemon Go people how to up the gamification in the COVID app.
Good idea. Good idea.
I jest.
All right, now, as long as you're staying inside right now.
Yes.
Maybe just a quick update on TUANZ, Craig. You mentioned the conference, which was fantastic. Lloyd amongst the other speakers. I mean, everyone was great. I enjoyed some of the panel discussions. There just seemed to be a lot of content sort of packed in quite well. There were no sort of hour-long talks or anything. They were short, punchy. But what's happening with TUANZ? I think last time we chatted, it was Telecommunications Users Association of New Zealand. What's happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, for 35 years, that's who we've been, the telecommunications, because the issues that were in that space were significant and needed, real focus. And we just looked at it a couple of, good 18 months ago and thought, do you know what? No one really calls themselves a telco anymore. If you think of Spark, or Vodafone. If you talk to them, they're talking about being full service providers. Look at Spark. They're a connectivity, mobility. They've got their Genii. Well, they did have the Genii brand. That's now digital services. They've got TV. We're just seeing this whole convergence of all of these technologies, and there's no and providers are broadening their perspectives. You think of people like NZME, for example. I mean, they're not just print anymore. They're radio. They're actually digital audio, if you really want to think about it. We did a podcast a couple of weeks ago on the future of radio, because radio is not just instant anymore. People listen to things afterwards, like this podcast, for example. And so they do video as well. So you've got this emergence of this melting pot of technology. And so we just thought, you know what? There isn't a users association for technology. There's lots of associations that represent the technology industry, but not the users. We're well placed. We've got a big history. So why don't we just step up and meet the market where it's about that convergence? And that's why all we did was change the T from telecommunications to technology, and that's where we're playing. And it's shown through the conference last week, which we called Tech Users Day, which was a relaunch of the old Telco Users Day. And I think you're right. We packed it, jam-packed. I like conferences where you don't let people speak for too long, and then you get their message nice and quick. And I also like running conferences where you get to, as you said, you get to actually meet the people that you're sitting with and dump your ideas and thoughts. We've always done that with our rural event. We've always asked people their thoughts, and we've always written it up. And so that's the sort of approach we take. And the beauty, we actually, at the beginning of the year, I interviewed across video 27 CIOs across our membership and across a few other companies, and asked them what their issues were. And none of them really came up with telecommunications in its own space. A little bit around 5G, there's still that. And so we sort of thought, well, we need to be speaking into that, as well as holding on to what we've done before. So connectivity is still really important to us, but developing New Zealand as a digital capable and nation is where we really believe we can have some impact.
Love it. Oh, it's that's good. Now onto Spark. They've released their latest, I guess, financial figures and so on. What were the highlights from your perspective there, Craig? What?
I think
what stood out?
A couple of things. One of them was, their profit was pretty decent. It hasn't really gone backwards at all. They've done very well.
They have. Yep.
They continue to do as they go. A couple of things. I think one of them was around they were losing share in the fiber broadband market. So their connections when it comes to broadband was going backwards a little bit. So obviously the market is pretty competitive, and people are having a crack. I still don't think there's enough movement, enough switching, and we can talk about that as well when it comes a little bit later. But the other thing was probably two other things. The first of all was they lost a significant revenue and particularly profit on mobile roaming. This is a particular bugbear of mine. I do not think we should be paying roaming to go to Australia. I think the two markets are close enough that we should not be paying roaming. And roaming, quite honestly, if you look back at its history, was set up because telcos in different countries could charge each other huge whacks of money, bump their revenue up on both sides of the ledger. And in Europe, they banned roaming charges across the EU, which is coming back to an interesting thing, Paul. I don't know if you picked this up, but one of the impacts of Brexit is that two of the biggest telcos in the UK are re-implementing roaming charges into Europe. So consumers in the UK will soon be going to the Europe and paying roaming charges, which they hadn't been for a couple of years, which is a step backwards in my mind.
Yeah, it's I mean, yeah, I guess they were forced not to, and now that they've got that freedom, they're taking advantage of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out. I think 2 Degrees have been doing having a bit of a play around with no roaming charges to Australia. So pat on the back to 2 Degrees there. I can't recall having heard that from anyone else. Certainly, roaming's got a whole lot better these days than it used to be once upon a time. But it's still one of those things when you travel. But I guess not going to be a big topic probably for a little while.
No, we're not traveling at the moment, but I do remember a couple of years ago having a pretty decent, roaming rate into the UK. It wasn't too bad, but as soon as I jumped on a plane and went to Barcelona, my roaming rate went through the roof. So, you have to be really quite aware of what the rates are and what you're doing. You're right about 2 Degrees on their top end business plans. You get it for free. But I'm sort of of the mind now of saying to these providers, you've lost that revenue, so it's already baked into your accounts now. Whip it out and never bring it back again. That would be my line to them. I don't think they'll listen to me, but I'll try. And say that because once we start traveling again, I don't want to be paying for roaming. So anyway, look, that the other thing.
None of us want to pay for anything, Craig. We want it all for free.
Yeah, no, I'm commercially aware enough to know that you've got to pay for some things. The other thing that came out of the Spark one was the fixed to wireless, or the so when you take a wireless modem which is connecting to the 4G or possibly 5G network instead of going through copper or fiber. And I did see that. I thought it was a bit of a stretch target. They wanted to do 40,000 connections last year onto fixed to wireless, and they only got about 19,000. Look, in my mind, there's nothing wrong with fixed to wireless as a provision of as a service. I think consumers, though, need to choose what works for them. And in some cases, fixed to wireless, those sort of wireless type services, where if you're a flatter and you don't want anyone else to use your broadband, it's a great solution. Particularly if you're a student and you're moving around flats, for example, or you're an older person with a lower data cap, it's fine. It's a good service. There's no way my house could cope with fixed to wireless. A fixed wireless solution. We have to be on the fastest fiber you can be. We do a lot of my wife's a counsellor in lockdown. She's doing a lot of Zoom counselling. She cannot afford to have a connection that breaks up, slows down, or anything. It's got to be rock solid.
Yeah. Yep. No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, my personal feeling is if you can possibly use fiber, then you should. It's pretty easy to get connected up. But I totally understand why why our providers would be wanting to sell the fixed wireless access into any opportunities that they get because they're not putting money into Chorus pocket. It goes back into their business and their networks, and obviously there's a level of balance there. There's only so much bandwidth available for running across the mobile networks, but that certainly has increased with 5G. And I think now there was another note that we had in our agenda, which was around the Commerce Commission sort of letter to telcos, and that kind of crosses into the space, doesn't it? Because it all comes down to how you sell it, and I think we've probably had some discussions in the past around the challenges of how you sell that, and I'm sure. when you've got a whole team of people that sit on the phone to customers, it's probably reasonably hard to get a perfectly consistent message across the board, particularly if you incentivize them to be selling the fixed wireless products. Can you run us through what that communication has been from the Commerce Commission?
Yeah, look, the Commission was given extra powers in 2018 when the Act was changed to look at retail service quality. I mean, we advocated quite hard that they were given some extra powers because that's the right body to look at these sorts of things. And we've had some anecdotal evidence, particularly over the last year, that fixed wireless solutions were being sold necessarily to people who didn't necessarily understand what they were getting, or it was being sent out. There's this inertia selling process where you might get sent a modem and said, plug it in, it's your new service, without even having asked for it, and then not understanding what that service is. And as I said, there is a real place for that service, but it's not always the right one that you need. So in this, what's happening now with the fibre rollout is, unlike Australia, we do not have a forced migration. In other words, if you have a copper-based landline service, there is no forced migration of that. You do not have to move off that unless there is so many people in your area that have taken fibre, and so there's very few copper connections left. Then Chorus can turn around and say to you, look, we need to take that copper service away. You need to look at an alternative. And so they're just starting to get into that space. And so what's been happening is that some of the providers have been using that as an excuse, that's my word, not anyone else's, to push their alternative rather than other alternatives. So not always giving the user the full information based on what's available. And so the Commission has picked up from people like ourselves, Consumer New Zealand, budgeting services, Citizens Advice Bureau, that this sort of thing's been happening. And the Commission has written to the industry to say, look, this just isn't good enough. There are some things that we think you need to do around how you market these services. For us, that's great because we've actually been talking about this just quietly in the background, but we've actually done our own independent research, which we're just about to finalise, but it's certainly around that complexity of services. And we've got some ideas around how that might, be easier for people to understand. And so I think there's a bit of work that needs to be done by the industry, by people like ourselves, by the Commission together, around, well, how do you explain to people the different types of services, where they can be used, and what they're most viable for. So, because what we don't want to do is reduce competition. You talked about it before. Fixed wireless is a good competitor to certain fixed solutions, and it forces the fixed providers like Chorus, Enable, UFF to continue to develop their networks and not sit still because the mobile networks aren't sitting still. So it's really important that that's there. So that's sort of where it's come to. And the Commission has said, well, here are some things we think you should do. And by the end of the month, everyone has to come back and tell them what they think. Our sense as the User Association is that we pretty much agree with the Commission. I haven't told them that yet. And here are some other ideas that you can think about. Because our research, we actually had an independent researcher look around the world at things that have been done elsewhere. I don't know if you remember, but complexity in telecommunications marketing is not something new. In fact, there was a very famous CEO of telecom that talked about, at a conference, about how telcos had used complexity and confusopoly, I think was a word that we made up, to market services. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
It is pleasing to know, and I haven't looked at a sort of breakdown for Spark, but despite their profit dropping by 9%, they still had a net profit 384 million. So that there's still money to be made in the world of telecommunications, but as you say, our telecommunications companies these days are much more than just providing phone and internet services. There's there's a broader range of technology offerings that are really part of what they deliver. We've certainly seen a lot of that going on from Vodafone as well, as they start building up what they offer into areas of the market that are quite different than what we would have seen from them just a few years ago. So now on to a couple of other topics that we wanted to try and get covered as well. This whole working from home thing, there just seems to have been really over particularly during COVID, because it's forced everyone to see what working from home really looks like. Ongoing discussion across really a broad range of media, different companies that have I think we were quite surprised, actually. I certainly was, when we started hearing about the COVID lockdown and working from home scenarios. And I think it was maybe Google that sort of led the charge last year and was saying, hey, everyone will be able to work from home until mid 2021. And that came through reasonably quickly during our lockdown here anyway. But we see that continuing. We see really a lot of discussion around working from home, especially on the benefits sort of side. I see comments around Mark Zuckerberg talking about how he really enjoys working from home. He had an internal memo to the Facebook team that ended up getting to the Wall Street Journal. And he announced plans to increase the flexibility for employees, and saying that he would work from home for at least half the year. Obviously, there's a variance from one organisation to another what is and isn't possible. We have a lot of small businesses in New Zealand. We also have this broadband that we've talked about, that if you are able to work from home, well, do you need to be in a big city anymore? That that changes things. We've got software developers and people in all sorts of roles that are closely tied to technology, especially, but across other fields, where folks work for companies that have no base at all in New Zealand. And they're sitting wherever they happen to choose, and they can choose a big town or a small town, or wherever they like, as long as they've got some broadband. And broadband's it's pretty accessible now. So really, really interesting to see these moves. I think Apple have had a bit of flack from people that have sort of saying, well, we might not go back to work with Apple, because they're wanting to see people a little bit more. But it's actually it's quite complicated within my own firm. We generally need to be in a position to pop out and visit customers in person from time to time. You don't quite know what any day is going to look like, and so we've probably been on the more cautious end around the working from home, but that's partly because of the way our teams are kind of blended, and that our teams have sort of a fair variety of work that they do. So if we just had a pure call center team, then that would be very different. But but we don't. And so how has your working sort of situation played out, Craig? Up until the last couple of days, you don't have too much choice.
Yeah, I mean, I've been reasonably flexible anyway, and my team is all remote, just because of the way we work. But I do have a base in the city, and which I can go to, and I think that's really where we're going to go to. Is that you're going to have perhaps a base that you can go to 2 to 3 times a week if you need to. and then be at home. I think the other thing is, in New Zealand, we sort of had to quickly get ourselves up to gear last year in the first lockdown. And globally, we didn't spend that long. I know people felt it was, we lived in lockdown, but if you've got any connection to anyone around the rest of the world, you'll know that people have not been in the office. My son hasn't been in the office since February last year. I was talking to Andy Berner at Xero in Denver, Colorado. He hasn't been in the office for 500 days. And so they're using tools of collaboration, etc. I think Google's saying 60% will return part-time. I see Mary's made a comment from Timely. They've always been sort of dispersed, working from home, and you build tools that enable you to collaborate, which is, again, where technology comes in. But I think we'll get to this hybrid. I think the hybrid model will slowly build, and you'll find people, organizations will work through those cultural issues. And again, it comes, we did this report at the beginning of the year. We talked to 27 CIOs, and they said this: developing the right way to work from home around, and it's not just the technology, the cybersecurity, etc., but it's the culture, how you do things and how you collaborate. And you're right, some businesses like yours or some others, working from home may not be the right way to go. It might be that you need to go in and you need to be in a group. And then there will be the extroverts amongst us, because I don't think Zuckerberg is an extrovert, but I think the extroverts amongst us need people, so we'll be going in.
Yeah,
you're right.
And I think there's an element there where some roles and some organizations are going to have to go through a level of sort of a metamorphosis to land in a place where the working from home is able to have an increased relevance. And then there'll be those that are very much in person type type things, that our supermarkets, for instance, unless we were fully robotic in our supermarkets, which we know there's a huge amount of potential in those regards in the years ahead. But while we're not in that position, and while people actually like dealing with people, I don't see there being an immediate change in those sorts of in-person roles.
I think the other interesting thing, Paul, I don't know, you're talking about, it doesn't matter where in the world you are, you can perhaps work for somebody else. I've got a young person in one of our Future Leaders programs in Christchurch. He's leaving a local organization and working for an Australian software company, changing his working hours a little bit. He's a bit of a gamer, so it probably works for him to start later and finish later. But I don't know if you heard, but I think it was Google. I'm not sure whether they released it publicly or it was found by somebody. They've given their people a tool that tells them what they'll be paid if they live in different cities. So for doing the same job, if you decide to move, I don't know, say from San Francisco, which is one of the most expensive places in US to work, to somewhere like Franklin, Tennessee, which isn't one of the most expensive places to live, your salary will drop commensurately, which has some very interesting cultural outcomes, I think, for organizations that they'll need to work through.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I was talking to somebody recently who had they'd chosen to move from Sydney to Melbourne, I believe, and they had yet to tell their employer that they'd moved. So the work they were doing is remote. The employer doesn't know. But the comment was that there's a different pay structure, in a different Australian state. And that they'll have to fess up at some point. So there's some interesting aspects there. So I'm really curious to see how these things will evolve. But I think the normal has changed, and certainly last year we had one team member who was New Zealand, Auckland based, and decided that they wanted to move back to Australia. And we said, yeah, go for it. We can accommodate that. And so there is I think much more willingness now, and there are some organisations where that has already become the norm. Remote working, whether it's here in New Zealand or in other parts of the world. We're just going through the process now, actually, of looking at new premises, and one of the discussion points is, well, will there be a lot more on the market in 6 months or 12 months? Do you hold out a little bit longer before making a long-term commitment on that front? And how much space do we do we need? It's been an interesting one, and of course, there's not too much that can go on when it comes to moving if you're needing new offices and bits and pieces sort of built in a new location for you. So now a couple of other things. There was LinkedIn had shared that they're allowing employees to work fully remote, and really completely removing that sort of in-office expectation. I think we're going to keep hearing these sorts of things, and I am curious how some of them will play out. But I imagine there's different expectations from different people, and you may have different teams where they very much need to meet in person in some businesses. But I can see for LinkedIn, which is an online product, we're streaming through video onto LinkedIn right now, amongst other platforms. How much is there that you would need to do in person, other than and I think I saw the comment there from Mary Haddock Stanland at Timely, talking about what they do as monthly regional office gatherings, right? So there are mechanisms to address I guess the flip side of working remotely. So now, there are a couple of other bits and pieces of news we'll just cover off very quickly. We hear about, so many different online scams, and the actual financial impact that those things have. And one of those issues is these romance scams. Seems Tinder think that they have maybe found a little bit of a solution for some of the issues that happen on their platform, at least. And so what they're introducing is a ID verification service. And so what that's going to do, I guess, is to use the camera in your phone. So you've got that front-facing camera. And then it confirms that the person that's live in front of the camera, matches up to using AI to the photos that have been uploaded to your profile. Seems to make some sense to me.
Yeah, this whole data identity and confirming that you are who you say you are is a big field, and it's going to be something really important. And look, I'm no expert on Tinder. I'd just like to put that out there. But
please hear that.
Yeah, having read a little bit around those sorts of things, knowing who the person is that's on the other end is critically important. Yeah.
I think I remember actually. I think it was Microsoft worked with Uber some years ago for a similar type of capability, so that the driver, they could prove that the driver was, the actual person that was registered. I imagine there was a window of time there whereby someone would register, and then their profile and account might have gone with a car, and then different people would maybe drive that car, certainly in some markets. And so that sort of approach would be very helpful in that situation. The other bit of news that caught my attention, and of course, there's always loads of tech news stories every day. There were a couple around security vulnerabilities. One was a report that millions of cameras, I guess, new cameras that we weren't aware of in the past, being vulnerable, including baby monitors and other cameras online. What do we got here? The report mentioned 83 million devices made by a mix of brands linked back to an IoT vendor called TrueTech. So Xiaomi, one of those brands, camera vendor called Wise, a whole range of people using these cameras, and you kind of think, well, should be something that you don't have to think about when you buy a baby monitor, but in actuality, any bit of technology that you buy potentially carries some risk from a cyber security perspective, and that's why it's actually pretty important to not just pick the shiny thing on the shelf or the thing that you see online at the lowest price, but give a bit of consideration to who the vendor is, whether they're regularly releasing updates to their technology. And I think there's a degree to which you have to weigh in the market they're coming from and varying other considerations in terms of, well, how much trust should I have? But it's getting harder and harder, isn't it?
Yeah, and you should. I mean, there's a couple of things, isn't it? I think you're right. The firmware updates, I always accept firmware updates on the devices I've got because it's usually because it's got to fix something. But cameras and baby monitors, how many of us just plug them in, make them connect to Wi-Fi and then forget them without changing, for example, the master password that it might have? Those sorts of things. I change all mine only because I'm in the industry and realize I like to play with things. So I like to get in and find out what's going on, and changing the passwords is one of those things you should do. So it's just something to learn and to do. So, as you said, piece of advice to people: when you install one of these things, get into it and change the password first thing.
Yeah, and I think these things are probably all come back to a general reminder that it's getting harder and harder to be a DIY sort of person with when it comes to tech, whether it's in your own home or even more so within business. And I know our team at Gorilla and at the Gorilla cybersecurity side of our business, as we're out there doing audits on usually small to medium organizations, we are constantly shocked at how wide open things are on a security from a security perspective. And I guess that's sort of reflective that we have so many sort of small businesses. You get your business started, you buy a few bits and pieces, you cobble it together, and you don't usually think that we need some help on a cybersecurity front in the same way you might need access to some other professional expertise. But that world has changed. So
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's been great to catch up, Craig. Thank you so much for joining the New Zealand Tech Podcast today. Now, where do people track you down, and how do they join up to TUANZ if they're interested in getting plugged in?
Yeah. Well, simply tuanz.org.nz is the website. It's pretty simple and straightforward. I mean, there's a whole lot of resources on there for working from home, for example, which I was just updating yesterday to make sure it was ready for today. For this lockdown. There's a join me button at the top. But I'm not that great on Twitter these days. I've sort of moved off Twitter, but it's TUANZ CEO. But we're on LinkedIn. Craig Young on LinkedIn. TUANZ is on there, as is our Future Leaders Program, Flint. Same with Facebook. Those are the places you can find us. And hopefully, if you do find us and connect with us, you find there's some interesting information there, and hopefully, we like to do these sorts of things as well, Paul. Talk to people about what's going on and what's coming down. But it's been a real joy and pleasure to be with you again. Actually, it's been a little while since the first time online, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it has been. Now, we're probably going to have to pick up next week a little bit more around the new Samsung phones. Haven't had too much chance to dive in there, but those that like to be on the cutting edge, I thought the interesting point, because the device doesn't look a million times different really from the last generation of their Z Fold and Z Flip devices. But these folding phones are sort of starting to get a bit more accessible. I think they're probably hopefully getting a bit stronger and more robust with each generation. But Samsung have dropped the price point across both models by $700 a piece. Wow. So it was the sort of $3,000 plus club if you wanted their large folding phone before. So starting to get slightly accessible, but we'll delve a bit more into that in another episode. The other thing is social audio platform Clubhouse. If you're wondering what to do in lockdown, come and join us there. They've got in the NZ Club on Clubhouse. There's a room there every night, 8:30 p.m. New Zealand time. Tuesday night is usually Tech Tuesday, but we tend to talk about tech, and I mean this week we're going to be talking a lot about lockdowns and what are the opportunities, what should we be doing as New Zealanders to move forward, and I guess to look a little bit at the positives that can come during these times of lockdown. So feel free to come and join us on Clubhouse. And of course, a thank you to our show partners, Vocus, Vodafone, Spark, Datacom, Palo Alto Networks, HP, Gorilla Technology, and Umbrella Connect. So thanks everyone, and thank you, Craig and TUANZ for your contribution today.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, take care. Cheers.